The graduation hall was glowing with lights, laughter, and the sound of applause as proud families filled every seat. Bright banners hung from the ceiling, and rows of young graduates sat neatly in their gowns, waiting for their names to be called. Among them was the CEO's daughter, the one everyone seemed to admire. Her father's company logo was printed on the invitation cards, and her name alone drew whispers from students and guests alike. They called her the girl who had everything: beauty, money, power, and a future already secured. Yet, as she sat there under the golden lights, her face carried a strange stillness. Her classmates smiled for photos, hugged friends, and laughed freely, but she only smiled politely, her mind far away. Cameras turned toward her, flashing brightly, and she waved as expected, but her eyes drifted to the back of the hall. Beyond the decorations, beyond the rows of proud faces. There, near the exit doors, an old janitor moved slowly with his broom, sweeping quietly as if invisible. His uniform was worn, his step steady, and though the world celebrated around him, he seemed untouched by it all. No one noticed him, no one but her. For a moment, her heart skipped a beat. Memories she had buried deep began to stir. The way he used to smile when she was a lonely little girl wandering the office halls. The way he offered her a tissue when she cried quietly after her father missed another school play. Now, years later, she saw him again, unchanged, still doing the same work, still ignored by the people who praised her family. A soft ache grew in her chest. She tried to look away, to focus on the ceremony, but her gaze kept returning to him. Something about his calmness made her restless. She remembered how his gentle words once helped her believe in herself when no one else cared. But now, as she sat there, surrounded by flashing cameras and polite applause, she wondered if anyone would ever know the truth about the man who had quietly shaped her life. The announcer's voice called her name, and the crowd erupted into cheers, but her hands trembled slightly as she rose. Everyone assumed it was excitement, but it wasn't. It was something deeper, a quiet storm forming inside her. As she walked toward the stage, her eyes flickered once more to the janitor, and for a fleeting second, their gazes met. He smiled faintly, as if proud but distant, and that look said more than any words ever could. She took a deep breath, knowing what she was about to say today would not be the speech people expected. Something was changing inside her, a truth she could no longer keep silent. The moment everyone believed would be about her. Success was about to become something far more powerful, a story that would reveal what truly mattered beneath all the lights and applause. The music played softly in the background as laughter filled the grand auditorium. Graduates hugged their families, friends took pictures, and teachers smiled proudly. But in the far corner of the hall, away from all the joy, stood the old janitor, moving his broom slowly across the polished floor. His faded uniform looked out of place among the shining gowns and flashing cameras. No one paid attention to him. To most people, he was just part of the background, a man who had always been there but never noticed. Yet, from the stage, the CEO's daughter kept watching him. Her eyes followed his quiet movements, and with each sweep of his broom, old memories returned. She remembered being a little girl sitting in her father's office, lonely and unnoticed, while adults talked about business and success. Everyone was too busy to care, except for this man, the same man now standing in that corner. He had once given her his lunch when she forgot hers, had fixed her broken toy quietly, and had told her stories about working hard with honesty, no matter who was watching. He never asked for anything in return, and maybe that was why she had never forgotten him. Now, seeing him again in the same old uniform, her heart tightened. To everyone else, he was invisible, but to her, he was the reason she had learned kindness, the reason she still believed people could be good without reward. Her fingers trembled as she held her speech paper. The crowd was waiting. Her father was smiling proudly from the front row, and the cameras were ready to capture every word she spoke. Everyone expected her to thank her family, her school, her mentors, but she couldn't, not yet. Because her success, her confidence, even her strength, didn't come from those people. It came from the man no one was looking at. The janitor continued sweeping, unaware that all her thoughts were about him. She could almost hear his voice in her memory, telling her that true worth isn't about titles, money, or applause. It's about what you do when no one notices. The thought made her chest tighten with emotion. Her heart beat faster as her name was called again, and she stepped toward the microphone. The audience clapped, the cameras clicked, but her eyes found him once more. He paused for a second, perhaps sensing her gaze, and lifted his head slightly. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, and in that quiet exchange, she knew he remembered her too. The room fell silent as she reached the podium. She smiled, not the perfect practiced smile of a CEO's daughter, but one full of emotion, full of truth. Everyone saw her confidence, but no one could see the storm inside her. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly as she began to speak. No one knew it yet, but her next words would change everything. The moment her name was announced, the hall erupted with applause. Flashing lights from cameras filled the air as the CEO's daughter walked gracefully toward the stage, her graduation gown flowing behind her like a soft wave. Her father, seated in the front row, smiled proudly, his chest lifted with pride. To him, this moment was the perfect picture, his daughter, the symbol of his success, standing on the grand stage of a prestigious university. The audience expected a flawless speech, full of gratitude and charm, the kind of speech that would make headlines and impress investors. She stood at the podium, her hands steady on the sides, her voice calm as she began to speak. "Good evening, everyone," she said softly, and the microphone carried her gentle tone across the hall. She spoke about lessons learned, about friendship, about challenges faced along the way. The crowd listened politely, nodding at the familiar words of ambition and perseverance. Everything seemed perfect, predictable, until she stopped. The sudden silence caught everyone off guard. Her eyes, once focused on the crowd, began to move slowly across the hall, scanning faces, searching for someone. Her father leaned forward slightly, unsure what had caused her to pause. The professors exchanged quick glances. The guests waited, but she said nothing. For a moment, the only sound in the auditorium was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant creak of a broom against the floor. Her gaze had found what she was looking for, the old janitor standing quietly at the back, holding his broom, frozen in confusion as he realized she was staring at him. Something in her expression changed, a warmth, a deep respect, a hidden truth that no one else understood. The audience shifted uncomfortably, trying to follow her eyes, wondering why she wasn't continuing. Her father frowned slightly, a mix of confusion and concern crossing his face. Finally, she smiled faintly, lowering her notes to the podium. "There's someone here today," she began, her voice softer now, almost trembling, "who taught me something more valuable than any book or class ever could." A ripple of curiosity spread through the hall. People leaned forward, whispering to one another. Who could she be talking about? Her father straightened in his seat, expecting her to mention a famous teacher, perhaps a mentor from the company. But her eyes remained fixed on the man in the corner. The janitor lowered his head, uncomfortable with the attention, unsure if he should stay or leave. The suspense in the room grew heavier, like the calm before a storm. She took another deep breath, her voice clear and steady, this time. "He doesn't wear a suit or a cap today," she said, "but he wears something far greater, humility and kindness." Gasps echoed across the audience. Her father's proud smile slowly began to fade, replaced by confusion. The janitor froze in disbelief. The moment everyone had expected to be a routine, polished speech was turning into something far more powerful, and no one knew what she was about to reveal next. For a moment, No one understood what was happening. The CEO's daughter stood tall under the bright stage lights, her cap shining as the applause faded into uneasy silence. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand and pointed straight toward the back of the auditorium. At first, people thought she was pointing at someone important, maybe a professor or a special guest. But when everyone turned their heads, they saw him, the janitor, standing beside his broom, frozen in place. The whispers began almost instantly. Confused murmurs spread across the rows of guests like a soft wave. "Is she pointing at him?" someone asked under their breath. "Why the janitor?" another whispered. The janitor himself looked around, unsure if she meant someone else behind him. But there was no one there. She was clearly pointing at him. His hands tightened around the broom handle, his heart pounding as every pair of eyes in the room turned toward him. Up on stage, her father's expression shifted from pride to discomfort. The CEO's polite smile vanished, replaced by a deep frown. He didn't understand what his daughter was doing. This was supposed to be a perfect day. Their family's name was on the university building. The reporters were waiting for photos, and every moment was being recorded. Yet here she was, pointing at a janitor like he was the most important person in the room. She didn't look nervous or confused. Her face was calm, almost determined. The silence stretched until it became heavy. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or wait. Some thought it was a mistake, others believed it was part of her speech. The janitor, on the other hand, looked down, embarrassed, wishing the ground would open and swallow him. He had worked at that university for over 20 years, cleaning after others, fixing what was broken, and never expecting to be noticed. And now, suddenly, every eye was on him. The CEO leaned toward one of the faculty members in the front row, whispering sharply, "What is she doing?" But no one had an answer. The girl at the podium finally spoke again, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the awkward silence. "Yes," she said softly, still pointing at the man, him. The audience stopped whispering. Her father froze completely. "That man," she continued, "taught me something my education never did." Her words hung in the air like electricity, charging the atmosphere with curiosity. No one dared to move. The janitor blinked, completely lost, wondering if this was some strange mistake. The girl smiled faintly, as if remembering something deeply personal. "While everyone saw me as the CEO's daughter," she said, "he saw me as a person." The crowd fell even quieter. Some looked back at the janitor with new eyes. Others watched her, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of this sudden twist. The CEO sat stiffly, his hands gripping his knees, as his daughter's words began to unravel a truth that would soon change. How everyone in that hall saw both her and the man she had just pointed at. Her hands shook slightly as she held the microphone, the bright lights reflecting the emotion in her eyes. The silence in the auditorium felt almost alive, thick, expectant, waiting for her next words. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with every sentence. "That man," she said, pointing again to the janitor, standing frozen at the back of the hall, "is the reason I'm standing here today." The crowd shifted uneasily, exchanging confused looks. Murmurs rippled through the audience, echoing against the walls. The CEO's smile had completely disappeared now, his face pale with surprise. No one understood why she, the daughter of one of the richest and most powerful men in the city, would give credit to a janitor. But she didn't stop. Her voice softened, full of emotion and honesty. "When my father was too busy building his empire," she continued, "and I felt invisible at home, he was the one who noticed when I cried." The crowd fell completely silent. Every ear listened now, not out of politeness, but out of genuine curiosity. "When I came to this school," she went on, "I was lost. Everyone expected me to be perfect, the CEO's daughter who never failed. But inside, I was falling apart, and no one noticed, except him." She pointed gently again toward the janitor, whose eyes were now glistening with disbelief. "He never asked for anything," she said softly. "He just listened. When I skipped lunch, he quietly left a sandwich on my desk without saying a word. When I failed a test, he told me, 'You're not your father's success. You're your own person.' And when I felt worthless, he reminded me that kindness is never small." Gasps spread across the hall like a wave. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for a moment, realizing this was not the speech they had come for. The CEO looked stunned, his lips pressed tightly together, as his daughter's words tore through the perfect image he had built for years. The janitor, still standing with his broom in hand, tried to look away, but tears rolled down his face. He never imagined she would even remember him, let alone speak about him in front of hundreds of people. Her voice shook again, but she didn't falter. "He didn't have money, or power, or fame," she said, "but he gave me something greater: time, kindness, and faith. When everyone saw me as a name, he saw me as a person." The audience could feel the weight of her truth. Even those who once whispered about her privilege now saw something deeper. A girl who had lived in a golden cage, but found her strength through a man society had ignored. As she spoke her final line, her father slowly lowered his head, realizing that this moment, this truth, was more powerful than any empire he could ever build. The hall erupted in quiet, emotional silence, not from shock alone, but from respect for a truth that had finally been spoken. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her next words sink in, her gaze still fixed on the janitor standing quietly at the back of the hall, a figure so ordinary yet so extraordinary in her story. The audience leaned in, sensing that this was no ordinary graduation speech, but a revelation of something deeply human. Her voice softened, but each word carried power. "There was a night during middle school," she began, "when I failed a very important test. I had tried so hard, but nothing seemed enough. I locked myself in a corner of the library, feeling the weight of disappointment press down like a mountain. I wanted to disappear. I thought no one cared, that I would just fade away unnoticed." Her eyes flickered with memory, the faintest tremble in her lips, betraying the emotion beneath her calm demeanor. "And then he found me," she continued, gesturing toward the janitor, the man who everyone called invisible, the one who cleaned the halls quietly, with no fanfare, no applause. "He didn't yell at me, didn't scold me, and didn't tell me I had to be perfect. He simply knelt beside me, looking me in the eyes, and said, 'Failing doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're learning.'" The hall seemed to hold its breath. There was silence, not the polite quiet of a formal event, but the kind of silence that comes when people realize they are witnessing something real, something raw and genuine. She let that pause stretch for a moment, watching the janitor's face, the lines on his forehead deepening with emotion, his eyes glistening. "Those words stayed with me," she admitted, voice steady now, carrying confidence born from years of remembering that night. "Every time I faced a challenge, every time I thought I couldn't go on, I remembered his voice, gentle, patient, full of faith, as if he had known the world would try to push me down. But I could rise again if I just kept going." She shifted slightly, her hands resting lightly on the podium, drawing the audience closer with her sincerity. "He taught me something my own home could not teach, that worth is not measured by grades, titles, or wealth, but by the courage to keep trying and the kindness to believe in yourself when no one else will." The room was completely still now, the whispers of confusion replaced with awe and understanding. People looked at one another, some blinking back tears, as the quiet janitor finally seemed to understand the impact he had made, not through grand gestures or money, but through a simple act of human connection. "And it's because of him," she concluded, her voice firm yet tender, "that I am standing here, confident, ready to face the world, and ready to make my own mark." He gave me a smile that carried hope, and in that smile, I learned that even the smallest acts of care can shape a life forever. The audience sat motionless, the emotional gravity of her story settling over the hall like a warm, profound light. The CEO sat in the front row, perfectly poised as always, expecting another flawless ceremony. Yet the words his daughter spoke cut through the polished veneer of his world like a sharp beam of light. He had thought he knew everything about her life, believed that every success she achieved was built on the opportunities he provided, the private tutors, the weekend classes, the latest gadgets, the cars, the trips, the endless invitations to elite events. Yet here she was, standing confidently on the stage, speaking not of his wealth or influence, but of a quiet man in a faded uniform who had quietly nurtured her spirit when the world seemed cold. He felt a jolt of disbelief ripple through him as he watched the audience react, silent at first, then murmuring in astonishment, and he slowly began to understand that he had been blind in ways no amount of money could ever compensate for. He recalled the countless times he had been absent, wrapped up in deals, meetings, and the pursuit of more, thinking that his presence alone, his providing everything material, was enough to make her life complete. Yet, as she described the janitor's simple acts of care, noticing when she was sad, giving her advice, sharing words of encouragement, and showing patient kindness, he realized how much he had missed. His chest felt tight, a strange mix of guilt and admiration swelling inside him. Guilt for the moments he had overlooked her pain, for thinking that wealth equaled love and security, for not seeing the human connections that truly mattered, and admiration for the janitor, a man whose life might have seemed small and ordinary to others, yet whose impact had been monumental, shaping the heart and confidence of his daughter in ways he had never imagined possible. As he observed the way she spoke, how her voice carried strength and authenticity, he recognized that the foundation of her character, resilience, empathy, and courage, had come not from luxury or privilege, but from someone who treated her with respect, patience, and care when no one else did. He could feel the weight of his own blind pursuit of success pressing on him, a realization that his influence, though powerful, had not reached the depth that this quiet human had touched. And yet, he also felt gratitude, a reluctant but real appreciation for the lessons his daughter had learned, for the way she had taken those small, unnoticed gestures of kindness and transformed them into a lifetime of confidence and purpose. As she finished her speech, pointing to the janitor and smiling, the CEO sat frozen, no applause ready on his lips, no grand gesture to offer, just an awareness that true guidance often comes from unexpected places, and that the simplest acts of compassion can leave a legacy far beyond what wealth and power can achieve. In that moment, he understood that he had been wealthy in everything except the most important things: attentiveness, presence, and recognition of the quiet heroes around him, and that lesson was one he would carry long after the applause faded. The auditorium, once filled with the usual clatter of applause and excitement for a graduation, grew completely still as her words echoed through the hall. "You taught me how to lead, but he taught me how to be human." The statement landed like a gentle but powerful wave, sweeping over everyone present. For a moment, no one moved, as if the audience itself was holding its breath to absorb the weight of the confession. The CEO's face shifted from pride to something deeper, a mix of astonishment, realization, and a touch of humility that only comes when one recognizes a truth long overlooked. Around him, fellow parents, students, and faculty felt their hearts tighten. Some wiped away tears they didn't even know had formed, moved by the acknowledgement that real guidance and compassion often come from the simplest, quietest acts. The janitor, standing near the back of the room, with his broom still in hand, froze, unable to comprehend what was happening. He had spent decades performing his work diligently, cleaning floors, fixing small problems, and helping students in ways no one ever noticed, never expecting acknowledgement or praise. Yet here, In a hall of hundreds, the entire audience now turned toward him with admiration, their eyes reflecting genuine respect and awe. Slowly, the first few claps began, soft and hesitant, and then, as if triggered by an invisible signal of understanding, the applause swelled into a thunderous ovation. The janitor's hands shook as he lowered his broom, not out of pride, but out of disbelief. He had never imagined that simple kindness, attention, and patience could move so many people so profoundly. Around him, the atmosphere changed, shifting from a conventional celebration of diplomas and achievements to something more intimate and human, a recognition of the unseen hero, the quiet force who shapes lives not through wealth or power, but through empathy and presence. The daughter, still on stage, smiled gently, her eyes bright with tears that reflected both gratitude and love. As she watched, the man who had guided her through her most vulnerable moments received the honor he had never sought. Her voice carried across the hall again, soft but firm, reinforcing the message that true influence is not measured by titles or status, but by the ability to lift others, to teach them courage, hope, and the strength to navigate life with humanity. The graduates looked on, inspired, realizing that the lessons they were taking from this day extended far beyond academic success, that life's real victories often come from recognizing and appreciating those who work silently, shaping the people around them with care. In that moment, the janitor became more than a figure in a uniform. He became a symbol of quiet heroism, a reminder that sometimes the most impactful teachers are the ones who never ask for recognition, and that the legacy of human kindness can resonate louder than any speech, award, or accolade. The applause continued, a celebration not just of achievement, but of humanity itself. After the applause finally faded and the graduates began filing out of the auditorium, she stepped carefully off the stage, her cap slightly tilted and her gown rustling softly as she moved. All eyes were still on her, some expecting another speech or a grand gesture, but she had something far simpler and far more meaningful in mind. Without hesitation, she walked directly to the janitor, who still stood frozen from the earlier moment, his broom awkwardly held at his side, unsure how to react to the wave of recognition he had just received. She reached him, and for a long, silent beat, nothing happened but the quiet hum of murmurs and camera shutters from the reporters gathering at the edges of the hall. Then she embraced him firmly, a hug filled with gratitude, warmth, and years of unspoken acknowledgement. The janitor, stiff at first, relaxed slowly, letting the emotions he had suppressed for decades wash over him, feeling appreciated in a way he never had before. Cameras clicked furiously, reporters whispering questions and trying to capture the historic image. But for her, the world outside that small embrace didn't matter. It was not about headlines or social media posts. It was about expressing what had been felt in quiet corners for years, the debt of gratitude she carried in her heart for the man who had silently nurtured her, protected her, and shown her the simple kindness that money could never buy. As they finally stepped apart, she looked into his eyes with a smile that spoke volumes, a mix of respect, love, and unspoken thanks. At that moment, the CEO, her father, who had watched the entire scene unfold with a mixture of astonishment and reflection, slowly approached them. He extended his hand, but words seemed insufficient at first, caught somewhere between pride, regret, and admiration. Then, with a voice soft but steady, he finally said the words that had been years overdue. "Thank you for looking after my daughter." The janitor's eyes widened, and for the first time in his life, he felt recognized, not just as a worker or a cleaner, but as someone who had made a profound difference in another human being's life. The daughter squeezed his arm gently, reinforcing the unspoken message that his small acts of care had mattered more than anyone had realized, shaping the person she had become. Around them, the crowd slowly began to absorb the moment. The reporters clicked. The audience murmured in awe, and a quiet ripple of respect moved through the graduates and their families, realizing that the greatest lessons are often taught outside classrooms, in moments of empathy and understanding. In that single act, a hug, a thank you, and a shared acknowledgement, a bridge was built between years of unnoticed labor and the profound impact it had on a life. The reunion was not just emotional. It was transformative, illustrating that sometimes the quietest heroes are the ones who leave the deepest marks, and that gratitude, when finally expressed, can illuminate a legacy far brighter than any accolade or recognition ever could. In the days that followed the graduation, the story of the CEO's daughter and the janitor spread like wildfire across the internet, shared on social media, news sites, and countless blogs, capturing the hearts of millions who had never met either of them but found themselves moved by the depth of gratitude and human kindness displayed. Videos of the moment she pointed at him, excerpts from her speech, and photos of their heartfelt hug were circulated again and again, inspiring comments and messages from people who reflected on the importance of noticing the quiet, overlooked people in their own lives. Schools began using the story in assemblies and classrooms, showing students that greatness is not measured by wealth, status, or titles but by small acts of care, understanding, and attention to others. Companies held discussions in boardrooms, asking employees to think about the unsung heroes in their offices and communities, those whose work often goes unnoticed but whose presence supports and uplifts everyone around them. Families at dinner tables talked about it, parents explaining to children that real influence comes from empathy, respect, and humility, and that even a janitor or cleaner can leave an imprint far stronger than any position of power. Meanwhile, the CEO's daughter continued her own journey, now carrying with her a lesson that would guide every decision she made: the knowledge that influence and leadership are not only about achievement, but also about the ability to see and honor those who help us along the way. She often remembered the janitor's calm presence, his patient guidance during her childhood struggles, and the quiet wisdom in his words that had shaped her confidence, resilience, and understanding of what it truly means to care for others. In the hallways, the janitor went about his work, sweeping floors, emptying trash, and tidying classrooms, yet the whispers of respect followed him like an invisible crown. Students passed by, nodding or quietly saying thank you. Teachers gave him small smiles of appreciation, and even strangers who had seen the story online approached him in the hallway with gestures of admiration and respect. It was a subtle, ongoing recognition, never loud or ostentatious, but it carried a weight far heavier than any award or accolade he had ever received. The janitor, once invisible to most, now felt the quiet pride of knowing that his small, consistent acts of kindness had created ripples that changed the life of a child and inspired countless others. Each whisper of respect, every grateful smile, reminded him that even the most ordinary people, through patience, care, and humility, can impact the world in extraordinary ways. And so the lesson was remembered, not just by the daughter or the janitor, but by everyone touched by the story, that greatness is defined by the heart, that quiet acts of service can leave lasting legacies, and that one person's attention and kindness can change lives forever, echoing through classrooms, offices, and homes, proving that the power to inspire does not always come with status, but with the courage to care.